The Haftorah that we read after the Parsha was established by our sages around the time of Chanukah. At the time of Chanukah, there was a decree not to read the Torah portions in the synagogue. And so the rabbi said, fine, we won't read the Torah portion, the 5 books of Moses, but we can read the prophets. And so they began to read the prophets every week. However, after the holiday of Chanukah, when once again we resumed our power and autonomy in the land of Israel, so the sages established that in addition to reading the weekly Torah portion, to also read the prophets afterwards. And this is called Haftorah. Haftorah means to take leave or to part. So, for example, when a person passes away, it is called Petira. He parted. He left this world. He went to another world. Haftarah means we are leaving the 5 books of Moses and we are going and entering into the book of the prophets. This is the meaning of Haftarah. Now, the Haftarah was not simply chosen because it was a prophet, but the Haftarah needs to have a connection to the actual Parsha of the week. In other words, the Haftarah of Bereishis, which is Yeshaya, Isaiah, needs to be connected with the actual portion of Bereishis. And so to make a few connections between the Haftarah and the Torah portion. First and foremost, we begin with Pasuk number 5, verse number 5 in the Haftarah, which talks about how God creates heavens, Bereishit. He continues to create the heaven, and he continues to give a soul to man. Here, the Haftarah is taking the Torah portion to the next level. In the Torah, we say God created the world. Bereishis, bara elikim. In the beginning, God created heaven and earth. Comes along the Haftarah and takes it to the next level and says, not only did God create the world 5,781 years ago, but Bereishit, every moment God creates the world anew. Every moment ex nihilo, God recreates the world. And therefore, each moment God gives us a new opportunity. Each moment God blows into us a soul. Each moment God is connected to humankind. He didn't create the world and leave the world, but rather he is associated and connected with each human being. And every moment he tells us he needs us, he cares about us. And he is giving us additional strength, life, and vitality to move on to the next level. This is the first idea in the Haftarah. We move on to verse number 6, L'er goyim, a light unto the nations. From here we see that, number 1, Torah is a light. A light means clarity. It gives direction. For a Jew, you have our Torah mitzvahs, 613 commandments. For the other nations, the 7 Noahide laws, which are more than 7, which are about 30 and more laws, how to live your daily life. This gives you light, this gives you direction, and this gives you purpose. Verse number 10, Shiru LaHashem, or Shiru Shir Chadash, to sing a new song. The Medrash tells us that there are 10 songs in the Torah. 9 already were sung in the past, and the 10th will be sung when Mashiach will come in the future. And this will be a new song, a song of redemption. What's the connection between redemption and the Parsha of Bereishis? First and foremost, the Gemara says, the Talmud tells us, when God created the world, he created the world for 6,000 years. 2,000 chaos, 2,000 Torah, and 2,000 the days of Mashiach. In other words, there was a purpose in creation, and that is to bring the world to a state of perfection, to be worthy and to be vessels, to receive the perfect world through the coming of Mashiach. And this is done through doing Torah, learning Torah, performing mitzvos. This is the way we create the perfect world. We are now 5,781. We are now in the era of Mashiach, the days of Mashiach, and that means Mashiach can come any moment, at any time. And therefore we have to begin to sing this song of Shir Chadash, the new song. This is also hinted in the Parsha, in Bereishis, where it says, V'ruach halikim merachefes al panei hamoyim, that the Spirit of God hovered over the waters. And that is before creation even, when the world was still full of tohu, chaos, of vohu, and emptiness, the Spirit of God hovered over the waters. Says the commentaries that this means the Spirit of Mashiach hovered over the waters. Why do we need the Spirit of Mashiach to hover over the waters before creation? But the answer is that this teaches us that there was a goal to creation. The world was not created by accident or random, but rather there was an intention, there was a purpose, there was a goal in creation. And that goal was the Spirit of Mashiach, which means a world of perfection, a world of unity, a world of love, when the entire humankind will dwell together under the banner of Hashem Echad U'Shemo Echad, one God and His one name. And this is also expounded upon in verse number 14, where the prophet says, I restrained myself, I kept silent and held my peace. Or I held my peace, I kept silent and restrained myself. But now I will cry out like a woman in labor. Says the commentaries, our sages, that this represents the 4 exiles of the Jewish people. Number 1 was the first exile was Babylon, was Bavel. God said, I will hold my peace. When it comes to the second exile, it says Pras of Persia. Again, he kept silent. When it comes to the third exile, which is Greece, Yavan, again, restrain myself. However, when it comes to the fourth exile, which is now the exile of Edom, of Rome, of this generation, God says, I will cry out like a woman in labor, implying that each one of us has to call out for the redemption. We cannot remain silent. This is a generation that we have to call out, we want Mashiach now. This is part of our avoda, this is part of our mission, to call out like a woman in labor. We have to scream and say, no, I will not accept the status quo. No, I will not accept a world where there is no peace and harmony. No, I will not accept status quo, that we are still in danger and there is hunger and suffering in the world. We need to call out in peace and dignity and harmony that we want God to rescue us and to bring Geula, redemption, to the entire world. We continue, verse 21. It says, God desires to make the Torah great. And here again it hints to the fact that even though it's Bereishis, we're starting the Torah anew, it's not that we are simply repeating what we learned last year, but we are starting all over again on a whole new level. There's new light, there's new energy, there's new vitality. We are now a year older, a year smarter, which means we have to become a year more observant. And that is Yagdol Torah, to make the Torah greater, to expound upon the Torah, and to make the Torah our personal Torah. And that the Torah should impact our daily life, in our work, in our relationships, in our food, in our house, in our sleep. Everything needs to be inculcated with the spirit of the Torah. Furthermore, the next chapter goes on to say, Omar Latzofoin, God will request from the 4 corners of the world to return. But here, in verse number 6, it says he directly talks to Tzafon, he directly talks to the north. Why directly to the north? Because the north is where the evil began, as the book of Jeremiah tells us. Mitzafon tipasach ira, from the north has the evil began. And this is representing the letter Beis, the first letter in the Torah, that is closed from 3 sides, but is open from the 4th side. Evil is on the north side. And when Mashiach will come, God will bring closure to the world. And he will bring closure to the north side. No longer will evil reign, no longer will we suffer from sickness or from mental illness or from any type of danger, but rather we will have closure from all the suffering and all the hardships. In verse number 7, he goes on to say, Berasiv Yitzantiv Afasisiv. Again, the purpose of the prophets and the Haftorah is to expound, is to develop and to elaborate on concepts that we spoke about in the Parsha, but yet it was not that clear, it was not that elaborate. Comes along the Haftarah and says, when God said, I created the world, Bereishit bara elikim, the first verse in the Torah, I created ha'es ha'shamayim, the heavens, the ha'es ha'aretz, and the earth. What does that mean in particular? Comes along Isaiah in verse number 7, and he says, I created the worlds of Berasiv, Yitzativ, Afasisiv. There are three basic worlds that God created. The world of Bria, the world of creation, the world of Yitzira, the world of formation, and the world of Asisiv, which is the world of action, this world that we are in today. So it developed. There was God that filled the entire world, and then there was what we call in Kabbalah the famous Tzimtzum, the contraction of godliness. God removed himself from this black hole, and then he entered in to this hole through a column of light called the Kav, and from this little ray of light the entire universe was created. And primarily there are three basic worlds, even though there are unlimited amount of worlds. It goes into three categories. The category of Beria, which is creation, the category of Yitzira, the world of formation, and the world of Asisiv, our physical world, the world of action. And we find something interesting here, that these three worlds represent also the three worlds of thought, speech, and action. In our own life, we also have this development to create our own world, to create our own destiny. It starts with intellect. It starts with the study of Torah. And then understanding the Torah and talking about the Torah. As we say in the Shema, to talk about it every day to your children, to your family. And then to fulfill the mitzvos. Not only to think about it, not only to talk about it, but to actually do it. And we find something interesting here. And that is that when it comes to Bria Yitzira, in verse 7, the words of I created and I formatted are connected together. But Afasisiv, I also created the physical world. There's a separation with the word Af also. And as we find in Kabbalah that these three worlds are implied by the graphic design of the letter Hey. We know the letter Hey has three lines. The top line, which is thought, and then you have the second line, which is speech, and then you have a third line over here, which is the Hey, which is action. There's a separation between thought and speech when it comes to action. Why? Because it's easy to say I have an idea. It's easy to talk about the idea, but there is a separation, there's a gap between the thought and the action, between the speech and the action. Many people talk a lot, I'm going to do that, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do the other thing. But to actually do it is very difficult. And therefore there's a gap, there's the af also between the thought, speech, when it comes, however, to action. There is a separation. So this concept also hints to the year in which we find ourselves. We spoke earlier this year that this year, Tavshin Pei Aleph 5781 on the Jewish calendar, is the year of Pei Aleph, 81, Af. Af on one hand means anger. On the other hand, Af means blessing. How do we understand this? So we understand this like this. It says that he left, so you could take it. We say like this, that on one hand, with Af, God punished the world. With Af, God consoled the world. As the Medrash says, Laku ba'af. They were punished with Af, with anger, and they were also umis nachmin ba'af. They were also consoled with the word Af. In other words, last year we suffered a year of divine wrath with COVID-19. This year, however, even though we started the year with COVID-19, but this year will be a year that God will bring consolation to this anger. And this is understood with the passage in Ecclesiastes that says, with I acquired my intellect, my wisdom, because of anger. What does that mean? That King Solomon says he acquired his wisdom with anger. It means as follows, that it was through toil and through hard labor that one acquires one's ultimate wisdom. Therefore, this implies that this is a year that we need to toil and labor in the wisdom of God, in Torah and mitzvahs, to make commitments to fulfill the Torah that God has given all the nations of the world, the 7 Noahide laws, and the 613. And by doing so, this is the power to transform the negative into the positive, the wrath of God, into the wrath of wisdom, which is a positive concept. As the Rebbe has explained, that Pei Aleph 81 alludes to Pelois Arenu, that I will show you a year of tremendous wonders. And this is the year that we are praying on, that we are banking on, and that we are believing in and trusting in, that we are going to see a year of amazing, amazing wonders. I would like to conclude with the following story. Being that this year is the year of Bereishis, in other words, a year of transformation. It's a time of starting over again. We started the Chumash over again. We are reading now the portion of Bereishis, and there's a famous Hasidic adage that says, the way you establish yourself, Shabbos Bereishis, that is the way the entire year goes. So let's start off with a story that took place with Elie Wiesel, the Nobel laureate who received the Nobel Peace Prize in 1986. The first time he met the Lubavitcher Rebbe in the Yechidus in a private audience, the Rebbe asked him, why are you so angry at God? And Elie responded, I am angry at God because I love him too much. And the Rebbe responded that if you truly love him, then you have to accept that you don't understand him. At a later date, he came to a Farbrengen on Simchas Torah at the height of the celebration of the final holiday in the month of Tishrei. And the Rebbe was talking at this Farbrengen. And Elie walks in, he's in the back of the synagogue, trying to hide away. And even though there are thousands of people there, the Rebbe eyes him and sees him and says, Elie. Elie Wiesel makes believe he doesn't see the Rebbe. The Rebbe again says, Elie. Doesn't respond. All of a sudden, two strong hands grab him and they begin to pass him over all the heads and they seat him right near the Rebbe. The Rebbe says to him, welcome, a chassid from Vishnitz. Elie Wiesel was a very passionate chassid of the Vishnitz Hasidic sect. And the first time he met the Rebbe, he said, I'm Vishnitz. I don't plan on becoming Lubavitch. So the Rebbe said to him, it doesn't matter if you're Vishnitz or if you're Lubavitch. What matters is that you are a chassid. That's the most important thing. And then he went on to say, at this Farbrengen, the Rebbe says to him, welcome. How do you celebrate Simchas Torah in Vishnitz? He says to the Rebbe, but I'm not in Vishnitz, I'm in Lubavitch. He says, you're right. So in Lubavitch, we celebrate by saying L'chaim. He said, in Vishnitz too. So the Rebbe fills him up a complete cup of vodka and says, say L'chaim. He said to the Rebbe, in Vishnitz, we don't drink alone. He says, nor in Lubavitch. And together they drank the first cup of vodka. The Rebbe said to him, in Vishnitz, you only have one cup of vodka? He says, nah, that's a drop of water in the sea. The Rebbe fills him up a second cup, he fills himself up a second cup, and again he says L'chaim. And they both down the cup. Now he says, my head is starting to make circles. And the Rebbe says to him, in Vishnitz, you only drink 2 l'chaims. And because of his honor and dignity, he had to say, no, of course not, we go all the way. So the Rebbe fills him up a 3rd cup of vodka, and he filled himself up also a 3rd cup of vodka. And he smiles to Eli and says, Eli, I think you deserve a blessing. I would like to bless you that you start over again. Eli says, I was drunk. What does it mean to start over again? Does it mean to start drinking again? What does it mean to start all over again? And the Rebbe gave him a bracha. He should start all over again. And then they both said l'chaim the 3rd time. After saying l'chaim the 3rd time, Eli says, I passed out. I woke up a short time later on the grass in front of 770. But this was the bracha that the Rebbe gave him. A bracha to begin and start all over again. And this is the blessing, my dear friends, I'd like to bless each and every one of you, including myself, that as we begin the portion of Bereishis, as we begin the portion of Bereishis, as we start the Torah from the beginning, that we should be blessed with the blessing to start all over. And that is to learn Torah like the very first time, with new excitement, with new insights, with new zeal, and with new geschmack, with new strength. To start all over again, to be able to see the world in its true beauty, to overcome this terrible pandemic that we have suffered through the past year. And we hope and pray that as we say in the Haftorah to sing a shir chadash, that very soon to sing the ultimate new song, when Mashiach will come and gather in all the exiles, with the coming of Mashiach speedily in our days.